Good morning. Welcome. This is the sixth and final meeting of the Budget Review Subcommittee on Education. We will bring the meeting to order. We'll start to call the roll, but I'll go over this one more time for the thousandth time. If you're present in the room, say you're in the room. If you're remote, say you're remote. Please call the roll.
Senator Kerr. Senator Parrott.
Present in my home district.
Senator Wise. Representative Banta.
Here in the room.
Representative Bojanowski.
Present in the room.
Representative Bridges. Representative Fleming.
Present in the room.
Representative Flood.
Present from the 75th District.
Representative Graham.
In my district and in the room. Thank you.
Representative McCool.
Here in the room.
Representative Miller. Representative Palumbo. Senator McDaniel. Representative Petrie. Representative Reed. Representative Huff.
Joining you remotely.
Representative Riley.
Present in the room.
Representative Tipton.
Present in the room.
Chairman West.
Present in the room.
Chairman West, this is Senator Thomas. May I speak for just a second?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I hope, since Kentucky University is on the agenda today, hope you don't mind if I sit in on this meeting.
I absolutely do not mind. You're more than welcome.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. And I would remind everyone, if you're remote, to please press mute when you're not speaking. At this time, we'll go over the approval of meeting minutes from the last meeting. Is there a motion for approval of the meeting minutes? We have a motion and we have a second. Without objection, is so ordered. We'll jump right in. We don't have a lot of time. This is, with COVID and everything else, protocols, this total meeting time is an hour and a half. We got a lot to cover. We will first bring up Chelsea Couch, School Facilities Construction Commission, and Christy Russell. Whenever you get settled, don't forget to turn the mic on and introduce yourselves for the record. What we're going to try to do here is get a report in 20 minutes. If we could stay tight with the 20 minutes, and you have the chair, go ahead.
Good morning. Is this on? Can you hear me? The
Green
light,
button.
it's on.
Pull it closer to you. We have a lot of problems with that mic.
Better?
That's better.
I'm Chelsea Couch. I'm the Executive Director of the School Facilities Construction Commission. With me, I have Christy Russell, who's our financial analyst. This morning, we were asked to come and present on 3 funding pools that we received in the last budget session.
You could hold on 1 second. I think she's going to help you with a different mic. It's a little bit louder, but not.
Better? Better?
Can you hear? So. Try
Good.
it again.
Better?
Let's try that.
Okay. The SFCC received 3 funding pools in last year's budget. We were just going to go over those very briefly with you guys. House Bill 405 is the State of Emergency Assistance Fund. It was general fund money in the amount of $10 million to assist local districts with costs for construction, repair, renovation due to flood. We had several districts apply, actually 4. They all received everything they applied for, and we gave out $9.8 million in reimbursements. With this money, if they receive FEMA or reimbursement from insurance, obviously they will pay the state back, but that is what we sent to those school districts. We were also given money from House Bill 556, Section 17. This is federal money for the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. We received $127 million. This is for, sorry, you threw me off. This is for priority 1 or 2 projects on the district facility plan, and we used the KFIX report that the Kentucky Department of Education puts together. We use the top schools on that report, and you can kind of see The recipients for that: Hart County, Martin County, Floyd, Boyd County, Bellevue Independent, Mayfield Independent, Jackson County, Grant County, Breckenridge County, Bath County, Cumberland County, Pendleton County, and Carter County. We did receive guidance from U.S. Treasury that stated traditional school construction projects may not meet the parameters and guidance from that. So currently these projects are all on hold, and they will be on hold until another funding source is identified. So we're kind of waiting with that one. We also were given money from House Bill 556, Section 18. This is for local area vocational education centers. It was $75 million. The budget bill just kind of gave us $10 million to support renovation costs. That's what each district could apply for. It had to include substance use disorder programs, job creation and training programs, bonding capacity, and needs-based local match was written in the budget bill. Kind of with that, our board kind of came up with some more evaluation criteria to kind of help us identify who had the most need. So we looked at the age of the current facility, their bonding capacity, their financial need, enrollment in their programs, their unemployment rate by county, the level of detail, because we did ask that they submit a written proposal for this, and also the existence of substance use disorder programs. 47 districts were eligible, 32 applied. Again, we had $75 million to give out, and we had $229 million in need that was given to us. And we funded 9 districts with that money. That's really all we had today, kind of just a brief overview. If there are any questions with those about those funding pools, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you so much. I will start us out with a question. On the ATC facilities, you mentioned a local match. What did we put in place for that? What is required?
So local match, we interpret it as when we ask, so for any pot of money that we give, we ask that the district restrict any kind of funds. So that is our funding, what is the rest of it?
They can restrict any of our funds, any local available revenue.
Any local available revenue, basically. All of their tax proceeds, we ask that they restrict that to be applied towards this project that we're giving them the money for. So we kind of ask that they have skin in the game.
Gotcha.
For lack of better
So is
term.
it a percentage?
It's not a percentage.
It's not, okay. Okay, that was my main question. So it's not a set percentage,
It is
but
not.
whatever agreement you come to with that district, they agree in their budget to
Restrict X amount.
Gotcha. Okay. Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, this is more of a general question about facilities. Can you speak a little bit about the challenges for some districts as far as building or upkeep on facilities? I sometimes have constituents who might go to a ball game in another county and they're like, oh my goodness, you would not believe this public school in this county. What kind of barriers or why are there discrepancies at times between facilities, between counties?
Well, we have 171 school districts in Kentucky, so we have a lot. I think the biggest, you go from eastern Kentucky to western Kentucky to central Kentucky, there's always going to be differences as far as your local tax base is probably the biggest. Eastern Kentucky, and I think jobs moving out of that area, there's less tax base to collect on, so there's less that they can contribute to facilities. Then you have Fayette County, but again, I think the cost of construction, I don't know if you saw the article in Fayette County for last week, that alone speaks to just the bids that they're receiving now, so they're not able to do as much right now.
If I could just
Yes.
And because I'm in Jefferson County, and we certainly have a tax base, but people leave Jefferson and go to another county, and they're just shocked. So I'm just really trying to wrap my head around it.
I think Jefferson County again just has a lot of students that they oversee. I think that makes a difference too. But really, Jefferson County, I don't know what their unmet need is right now off the top of my head, but I could get some of that information to you if that's what you're looking for.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start off and just kind of follow up on Representative Bojanowski's question. Of course, you all testified, presented in the school funding task force this summer. In the question came up a lot, the comments came up about the districts interstate who are losing population, who are losing property assessment. In relation to funds like these $75 million for the LAVACs, are there school districts that have challenges coming up with the local match in order to qualify for these funds? And has there been any consideration given to looking at taking that into consideration and giving flexibility to the amount of local match they have to come up with?
So I think most of those districts are rating higher on the list, especially in this Section 18 that when we weighed them. So the smaller districts most likely have less bonding capacity. Sure. So automatically they're kind of up there, and we look at those a little differently. When I say restricted money, they are required every 2 years to restrict money on June 30th. So any money that, there's not a certain amount that we're asking to see, we're just asking to see something. We always like to see a little skin in the game, but back to your question, as far as the smaller schools, I think they do weigh in well as far as bonding capacity, and that kind of gives them a foot forward.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, one more quick question.
Yes, sir.
I asked you a question back in the summer, and you're kind enough to send me an email answer, and I've forgotten exactly the total, but and you maybe you remember off the top of your head. I asked a question about how much unmet facility need there was across the state. Mm-hmm. Do you happen to remember that number? I've got it in the email I couldn't find real quick. Do you happen to remember that number?
I don't. I know the latest report is coming out. We actually just received that last week, and that's right around $6 billion.
Right around $6 billion. I knew it was a big number.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Graham.
Okay.
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 Thank you. Any other members who seek to ask questions? Seeing none.
Perfect.
Thank you for that report.
Thank you.
You are under time. That's awesome.
Try really hard.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
CP and KSU love, they're appreciative that there's plenty of time.
More time for them.
Thank you.
Now, if we could have the Kentucky State University update portion. Dr. Thompson, once you get settled, I'll let you kind of drive the bus here. You take off. I think we have 45 minutes set aside for for your segment.
Okay.
So that'll leave that'll leave us a half an hour to ask questions after your part of the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Chair West, committee. Good to see everybody. It's good to be here. We have Travis Powell that's long distance here. We kind of split duties. I gave a keynote for Western this morning. He's out there. So he'll be giving the report. And you have next to me Acting President Claire Stamps to the right of me. To the left of me, you have Greg Rush, who's the Chief Financial Officer at KSU. We want to start the conversation out by, you've already heard a lot. We'll give you more detail in this report, deep detail. We're going to go through it fairly fast because it's a long report. I do want to say, though, when the governor issued the executive order for CPE to take an in-depth look at the finances and some other stuff that's in the executive order, we wanted to make sure that we were finding out everything that we needed to find out in order to give you as much transparency and what took place, as well as what's needed. And that's what we're here to do today. I will thank these two folks with me for really just opening up everything. We went in depth. We did a third-party review from CPE, led by Travis Powell, Susan Krause, former treasurer of University of Kentucky. So the information we provide you today is about as deep as we possibly can get. And so I'm going to shut up now and let Travis, just for the sake of time, and then we'll be here for questions. Travis.
If you could hold on 1 second. These are available online. I have the current financial status of Kentucky State University This is a CPE assessment to all members. This stuff's available online. It's not in your packets, but I would advise you to read this at your leisure. It's very good information. Thank you. Please.
Thanks, Chairman West. Let me make sure that we're all ready to go. Okay. So first off, again, thanks for having us today. I'm Travis Powell, Vice President and General Counsel at the Council on Post-Secondary Education, work with Dr. Thompson. Again, we as Dr. Thompson mentioned, we'll go through this quickly. It's a very detailed report, and I've given a version of this a couple different times, once before our board and once before Kentucky State University's board. And I think the first couple times it took like an hour and a half. So I promise not to take that much time now. We'll go through some of this quickly and make sure that you all have plenty of time for questions at the end. And I want to give obviously some time for President Stamps and CFO Rush to speak to you all as well. So this is just the overview of the presentation. So I'll go through this quickly, the different areas that we'll talk about. We'll start off here with the executive order. This was issued on July 20th, 2021 by the governor. We're really going to focus on the first two aspects of this, mainly the current financial status assessment. That's the report that you all have. We'll talk a little bit about the management improvement plan at the end, and Dr. Thompson will go into some of the sort of next phase of this process. We're also part of we'll talk a little bit about the search committee too for the new president and tell you the makeup of that committee as well. So the first item that we looked at as part of the financial report was the cash flow and working capital analysis. We performed the following review of cash reserves and working capital, and you can see here all the items that we took a look at in order to get this assessment, reviewing historical financial information, had direct access to the KSU's accounting system. We interviewed finance and administration staff as well. The findings here are probably mainly what you would expect as far as the major cash inflows and outflows for Kentucky State University. Obviously, state appropriation, tuition, and fees, the biggest driver of revenues on the campus. Outflows, payments to employees and suppliers, and payments to students as far as financial aid goes, capital assets and capital improvements, and some other items related to debt. So based on our cash flow and working capital analysis, and you will certainly see a theme as we go through this process in all the financial metrics that we look at here for Kentucky State University. But looking at 2016 and 2017, you'll see that cash and cash equivalents, relatively high. And if you look at the benchmarks for institutions this size, it's kind of where you want to be. Things were looking in a pretty good situation in 2016. And then in 2017, still a pretty good situation. And then in 2018, it takes a drop a little bit. And then in 2019, you'll see that cash and cash equivalents are down to $2 million from a high of almost $20 million in 2016. Current liabilities go up as well. And you have an increase in an operating loss there too, which includes all the revenues, including state appropriations, tuition and fees, and that sort of thing coming into the institution, operating at a loss. So again, this is a trend you'll see further as we look at the other financial metrics that we look at. So other findings in our cash flow and working capital analysis are inappropriate cash and working capital management techniques used. Vendors were failed to be paid in a timely manner. State construction accounts were not reimbursed. There were draws from a revenue anticipation note that had to be paid back, obviously with interest to the bank. Institution didn't follow its policies related to collection of student receivables. And some incomplete accounting on draws from the endowment. The known impact of this, and and CFO Rush has presented on this before legislative committees, and I think this committee before, an impact of $15.7 million from prior year expenses, and then a current projected $7 million shortfall due to a structural imbalance in the current university budget. And that's roughly gets you to the $23 million number that you've heard discussed frequently as part of this process. Our cash position at the end of September was temporarily relieved by an advancement of a fourth quarter allotment of state appropriations and some federal dollars from CARES debt forgiveness. The current projections indicate that cash revenues will be depleted by March 2022, and the revenue anticipation note will need to be used in April just to continue basic operations. So essentially, at the end of March 2022, KSU will be out of cash. An additional non-recurring appropriation from the General Assembly is needed for continued operations beyond April, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. The next item, we looked at financial health assessment. We took a look at 4 financial ratios. I won't read those to you, but they all load up into a composite financial index. Audited financial statements are used to compute these ratios, which is why you won't see the current the most recently ended fiscal year 2021 is not as they don't have the financial audit has not been completed yet, and we were not able to use that in the calculations. First item here, the primary reserve ratio, probably the most telling of all the ratios, and something that's for non-financial folks, non-accountants like myself, the thing that's easiest to wrap your head around. And then look at that bottom number there, and you'll see days of expenses covered by revenues. And what you're looking at here is we want to see how long the institution can operate if no new revenues were generated. Now, revenues are always generated typically, but what do you have in reserves to continue operations should something happen that you need to draw on them? And as you can see, again, as I mentioned earlier, 16, 17, we've got, we're exceeding the industry standard, and you can see that up there of the ratio in 16, 17, 17, 18, and then it plummets in 18, 19, and in 19, 20 down to 35 days cash on hand. And we expect that to be even worse in the next audited financial statement.
Travis, let me jump in and just say, for those who know exactly how rating agencies look at organizations, when you're getting to 158, 165 days cash on hand, you've got a heck of a rating. And so I would want you to understand that just within that sort of venue. So that's up to AAA rating when you get to that point. Not that they would give you that necessarily, but that's a good benchmark.
Yeah, certainly a key indicator for ratings, for bond ratings, absolutely, and a key indicator for financial health. Next financial ratio we looked at is viability ratio. It's a corollary to the primary reserve ratio. It looks at plant-related debt, which is long-term debt related to facilities, bonds, capital leases, those sorts of things. Basically, it looks at how much your expendable assets you have on hand to pay for debt that you may owe. And again, we're looking at the ratios in pretty good shape there early on, start to drop in 18-19, and then plummets in 19-20. Net assets, return on net assets ratios, the next one that we look at in the consolidated financial index ratios. Really what you're looking at here is whether the institution is better off at the end of a period than at the beginning. So you can see the numbers there. The negative number at the top there is basically in 2015-16 at $3 million, essentially the difference between this beginning of the year in 15-16, the beginning of the year in 16-17. And you can see there at the end of 16-17, we actually had an increase. And you can see that the institution was actually able to put some money in its reserves additionally in 16-17. But starting in 17-18, and then obviously the big drop in 18-19, you see that the institution actually diving into reserves and taking away from the cash on hand that was used that you saw in the previous ratios. The next item is the net operating revenues ratio. This looks at whether an institution can conduct operating activities by just using operating revenues during a period and not dipping into reserves. And this, how much are you hopefully adding to your reserves each year? And then you can see here, again, a small negative number, which is not good, but still not terribly troubling until you get into 17, 18, and then obviously 18, 19, where you have extremely large negative numbers here. Essentially shows that revenue stream and expense streams are unsustainable and need to be restructured. All these are weighed, these ratios are weighed and put into Composite Financial Index. And this Composite Financial Index was used actually in the House Bill 303 KSU Management and Improvement Plan that was reported to this committee. Plan approved by the council, although the oversight was not by the council during that time. And basically reports were just generated to you as part of the obligations of the bill. But as you can see, there are the scores over time. Go to see the CFI scores on the bottom there, computed by CPE. In the financially healthy, above the relatively financially healthy area, 16, 17, 17, 18. Then again, same story, dropping in 18, 19, and then 19, 20 down to a negative number. And you can see there the number above that is CFI score previously reported by KSU, and obviously painting a much better financial picture than we were able to find. We could not find the working papers for the prior calculations to see how they were calculated, to figure out where they may have come up with these numbers. We actually back out the pension impact based on the recommendations of the drafters here. We do that because it skews the information a little bit. Pension impact we're required to book for accounting standards based on how the pension system is operating based on KSU's share of that liability. We back that out to get a better sense of how the college is actually doing, but that's not what caused the difference here. We're really not sure, but regardless, it painted a much rosier picture than what was actually going on at the institution.
Travis, leave that there for a second. I just want to point out to the committee, be really clear, and Travis was, but that top score was what was reported to you, to us, and to the Board of Regents at KSU by the former administration. That bottom score was the actual score. So if you look at 1920 as an example, if you look at the rating, they were in relatively good shape. And just to be clear, if you're a 3 or higher on this, you're in good shape. I mean, 10 is almost like utopia, right? But if you're 3 or higher, you're in good shape. So in 1920, it was reported to everyone that they were in really good shape. In fact, you had a negative, which means that you're in really bad shape. So I just want to make sure that everybody understood the difference between that top row and then that bottom.
The next item in the report is the peer group comparisons. The slide you have in front of you sets forth our peer group that we looked at and the selection criteria. We'll just note that the enrollment, KSU is one of the smaller institutions, if not the smallest institution on this list. But these 8 institutions we feel pretty comfortable as our benchmarks. We'll talk with KSU staff about this and agree these were a good benchmark set of institutions to use. And we in the report, you'll find extensive graphs that outline all these. I'll just hit some of the highlights here quickly. KSU's published in-state sticker price is above the peer median. However, the in-state prices grew more slowly than the median group between 2017 and 2021. But its net price is considerably lower than that of peer institutions. KSU had a lower average net price of college attendance than any of its peer institutions. 60% of the group median. KSU's net price decreased by 23% from 17 to 19, while the group median decreased by 1. Now, I'll make a note here, and Dr. Thompson may want to speak further on this. We want our institutions, our students, to have low net price, particularly considering the demographic of students that are served by this institution. However, when you're looking at your peer group, you should look similar to your peers. And what this tells us is KSU is leaving some money on the table here that they need to take a look at what they're charging in the net price and how they're doing institutional scholarships to take a look and make sure that they're more like their peers. Because again, We want to make sure that students are, having a good experience and paying what they can pay based on their need. But this is something that that KSU is definitely going to have to take a look at, because again, amongst the peer groups, you look more like your peers.
And I just want to add several reasons here. Obviously, we've kept tuition very low, way below in the history of us setting tuition. That's one. Number two, though, is systematic way of thinking about doing scholarships. When I was there in 16, 17, we had to reestablish a systematic way of thinking about scholarships. Number three, how many of the students aren't paying? How many students are in a position where they're not filling out the FAFSA maybe to get some of the dollars that could come to the state. All of these things will be taken a deeper look at as we go through the process.
Tuition and fee, state appropriation, and government grants and contracts per student are higher than the group medians. KSU's tuition and fee revenue per student ranked second highest amongst the group. Its state appropriations were second highest, and its government grants and contracts per student were the highest at 144% of the median. Again, good news there. KSU does have revenue coming in at a pretty high level compared to its peers. Now, again, they're one of the smaller institutions, and scale-wise, just to run an institution, a base level cost you need to have in place. So, looking at a per student basis at one of the smaller institutions is certainly something to consider here. However, still, some relatively good news here on the revenue side, in my opinion. Staffing levels compared to its peers, KSU employs fewer teachers and instructional support staff. Again, smaller institution, but still something to note there. But more management, business, and financial operations staff. So that same semester in fall 2020, the number of management staff employed by KSU ranked third highest, and it was 127% of the median group. So definitely something to consider there in the organizational structure when we're looking at the organization. Compared to its peers, KSU also employs more computer engineering and science staff, more non-teaching staff there, and more community service, legal arts and media staff as well. Faculty compensation, for the most part, average salaries at KSU faculty are either at or slightly above the median. But average salary of full professors is below the peer median and ranked seventh lowest. Degree production was the lowest amongst peer institution. KSU awarded 9 bachelor's degrees for every 100 FTE students, which was the lowest among the peer group, and 54% of the median. And in 16-17, KSU ranked first in the median at 157% of the median. So definitely a big decrease. Now we know this is 19-20, and KSU will show you some more recent numbers that they were able to get, that there is some improvement being made in this area, but still an area of concern for sure. And also too, with the graduation rate, first-time full-time degree-seeking students for the 2013 cohort was 9 percentage points below the group median. Now, again, KSU will show you today that number has increased, so we got a good story to tell. But at the time, they were below the median significantly. However, good news, retention rate is highest among its peer institutions. First-time full-time bachelor-seeking students they had the highest retention rate at 7 percentage points above the median group, which is definitely a good sign and often a leading indicator.
And let me just throw in here, the graduation rates, of course, is a legacy rate. It's 6 years in the past. The retention rate is a leading indicator. That tells us how well that we need to be focusing on those students to make sure that they do graduate. So that is a very positive story in the last few years. We've seen the retention rate increase, and so that we should have graduating classes. Now, we also have to parse out how many of those we're paying or are still in the pool versus those that aren't. But as a whole, I think this is a very positive direction we've seen.
Yeah. And it shows in the data that you'll see from Kentucky State. I mean, in the next cohort, again, we didn't have the comparison groups to look at for their more recent data, but you'll see an increase in the graduation rate close to 10% in the next 2 cohorts, which is very positive. I'll just quickly here mention, part of the financial analysis was to validate all the information that KSU provided to any public entity, whether it be its board of regents or legislative committees or the governor or anything else that was reported out publicly. So we spent a lot of time validating the information pulled together by by KSU, and just wanted to note that all the information communicated externally since the issuance of the executive order has been accurate, and if anything ever needed to be updated because of incomplete information, that happened as well. So everything that has communicated has been accurate to the best of our knowledge. We also did a review of the controls over financial management and reporting. I won't read through all those, but we looked at all the internal accounting system, internal audit, receivables, budget management, and interim financial reporting, audited financial statements, talked with staff. What we found was that their accounting system and related Argos reporting tool is inadequate. I'll let CFO Rush speak about that, but this makes it very difficult to generate financial reports at KSU without a lot of manual manipulation, which is very problematic. The internal audit function was non-existent for approximately 3 years, the last 3 years until 2020, and the tip line was the external tip line was discontinued in 2017. An internal tip line has been reinstituted, but not an external one in the last few months, which is a positive step. Current internal audit function beginning in early 2020 and comprised of one FTE has been ineffective in providing a comprehensive risk-based audit approach and regular communication to the board. No long-term financial planning exists, no long-term financial forecasts, failure to follow policies related to collection of student receivables, lack of budgetary controls, and failure to follow existing policies. Staff that we interviewed told us that oftentimes leadership at the time would when questioned about policies and procedures in place, we're told not to follow the policies in place and to just get things done, even if they were in violation of policy or not within the full policy. There is inadequate interim financial reporting, so no quarterly financial statements, no budget to actual comparisons, no dashboards for a board of regents or the public to look at to see how the institution is faring with regard to its budget in a real time or on a quarterly or regular basis. We already mentioned that the financial ratios provided were inconsistent, missed some audit findings, and consistently missed audited financial statement deadlines, which is a major problem. As you all know, audited financial statements are already backward looking, but when in situations where you, for example, in the audit for fiscal year ending 2020, which ends in July 30th, 2020, the financial statement wasn't issued final until March of 2021. Typically, those statements are due in the fall for the state's consolidated financial statement. So anyway, you've got a backward-looking assessment anyway, and then by the time it's actually completed, the current fiscal year is almost done, and it just makes it almost impossible to do any kind of planning and assessment of where the institution is so far behind. And there's been findings related to those as well, related to the U.S. Department of Education, who requires that audits be done in a timely manner as well. We alluded to this earlier in the cash flow analysis. Our board made a recommendation to a request for a special appropriation of $23 million to fill the current shortfall at Kentucky State University. Our board also recommended a significant amount of oversight with regard to those dollars if they were to be appropriated, to ensure that they are spent correctly, and also monitoring the situation moving forward, so to assure that the KSU doesn't get in the financial situation again. Overall, our recommendations, in addition to the budgetary recommendation, I'll just mention a few of these, and these are obvious based on some of the findings that we found, but I'll just mention the first one, and maybe Dr. Thompson, you can expand upon this a little bit, of cultivating a culture of accountability, transparency, and compliance established by the tone at the top, which would be the board and the president.
Y'all have seen me testify way too many times about my belief in being transparent and open and honest. Well, I think this has to be done in such a way that is directed. As the president of the council, I can tell you that I can provide my board with what they're asking for, but they may not know how to ask for everything that I can provide them with. So I want to make sure I provide them with stuff that they never thought that they even wanted. And I think this has to be the philosophy that we use with our administration and Board of Regents and trustees on all of our campuses, especially here. We have to develop this at KSU. I don't think these folks next to me would disagree with that. So a part of this is really being transparent with all the information you have to the point of ad nauseum, even. And so this is what we haven't seen. We've seen actually just the opposite in many cases, and you can read the rest of these bullets, but all of those things really fall under that one big bullet. You know, what are those pieces of information? And I think this has to be also with student success numbers. I mean, all of these pieces of information we found wasn't provided, or at least not at the level that was transparent, and sometimes not at the level that was truth. So, and I'll leave it there, and I'm sure you have questions later on.
Yeah, I'll just mention too that that's already started with the two folks that you have there in front of you, President Stamps and CFO Rush. I mean, completely accountable, transparent. We've nothing but transparency, and we've worked so well with them to get the information to be able to complete this report. And I think that's already starting at the institution, which is an excellent sign. Again, most of these have already been mentioned. Again, review of academic programs. We didn't really get into that. We will more in the management and improvement plan piece. But obviously that has a financial impact, and we want to make sure that that's looked at as well. Endowment investment policy and incorporate a formal spending policy with an investment policy. Again, quarterly reporting to the Board of Regents. We saw president's travel, entertainment, and discretionary expenses go extremely over budget. That's just one example of the many areas that went over budget. And that would be a good indicator to provide to the boards just to see how the president is managing his or her budget. Just to sort of summarize, obviously there's significant operating deficits in recent years have resulted in complete depletion, essentially, of KSU's cash reserves, and the structural deficit is unsustainable. There was poor leadership over financial management at the institution with inadequate budgetary controls and inadequate both internal and external financial reporting, and an inadequate internal audit function. But one positive, KSU compares very favorably to its peers in state appropriation, government grants and contracts, and tuition and fee revenue per student. So there is a financial basis there to move forward at the institution. That concludes the financial assessment piece. I'll go ahead and just move quickly into our management and improvement plan areas, and I won't read all these to you because you know we're short on time. Both our board, CPE's board, and the KSU board has approved these areas. You'll see there, they obviously relate to the financial number 6 there of the accounting and fiscal reporting piece. But we're looking at all other aspects of the institution as well, from student success, academic program offerings, organizational structure, board member training, policies and procedures. We're in the process now of outlining processes essentially for all 7 of these items, putting teams together at CPE and KSU to take a look at these items individually and get expertise in each one of these individually and come up with a plan moving forward. But we thought it was important to put all the areas together and figure out which broad areas that we're going to focus on moving forward in the next few months and fulfilling this part of our obligation for the fiscal year, but also probably for a long time moving forward. And, you know, we may add to these at some point too, but these are ones that we feel strongly about that need to happen. And some of the things within these can happen immediately. Some will take a little more time. Some of the accounting and reporting pieces are already in place, but some will take a little more time. Like, for example, some of the academic program offering reviews will take a little more time, but they're all important. They all need to be addressed. And we're working on each one of them in a lot of detail, starting essentially now that the financial assessment piece is completed. Just to give you an overview, Governor also charged us to assist in the leadership search and assist, and I'll mention that again. This committee here that you see in front of you of 11 members will give recommendations to the Board of Regents for a new president. You can see a good representation there. All these different groups were chosen by the individual groups. Now, we worked, Dr. Thompson and I worked to get the Frankfort community member, Patricia Waldridge, is who's on the city council there in Frankfort, will be the member. They're also a KSU alum. Frankfort K-12 representative, Paul Thompson, who's the athletic director at Frankfort Independent Schools. But our other groups were chosen by the faculty, staff, and students, and the Alumni Association all had elections to choose these individuals. We instituted the work of an executive search firm to assist with the search process, and we're just starting that. So we'll have our first meeting probably next week, or actually after I think the Monday or Tuesday after Thanksgiving, to go ahead and get started. Would like to have a new president in place if all things go well by named by July. So that's the current goal. But anyway, that's the outline of the search committee, and we're looking forward to starting that process.
Mr. Chair, a couple of things I want to say, and then we're happy. I think we came even under your 45 minutes, but a couple of things I want to say. KSU's been existing for 135 years, and the amount of history that's there, the service they provided, Representative Graham could give you a better detail than I can, but just let me tell you, it was important 135 years ago to come into play, and it's still important, and it needs to be important to us in the state for another 135 years. It needs to remain an HBCU. And for us to do that, we need to figure out a way to help it to thrive. So we're asking for these dollars to kind of square away now, but it is as important, or probably more important to me as the head of higher ed for Kentucky, to say, how do we really do some long-term strategic ways of thinking about all the things that it will take to help KSU to be even more important to this state, to this city, and in such a manner that we can be proud that it happened. So this is our report, sir, and we'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson, and thank you guys for being brief and respecting our time frame. That's really good. I'll start us out with a couple questions. This is a lot to take in, a lot to digest. And what I'm doing with my questions, I'm kind of going back and forth between your presentation today, and then also I'm taking a lot of my information out of your financial status report from CPE. CPE stated that there were significant differences between what was originally reported and what the actual finances were between 2015 and 2020, kind of that time frame. And the numbers reported showed that the university was financially healthy. In Mr. Powell's presentation, he touched on a lack of working papers when you did your analysis. In your opinion, were there a different set of financials for internals and another set of financials for outside reporting, or do you think it was just disorganization or lack of working papers?
Well, Greg Rush will answer probably better, and Travis can jump in. What I will say is what we try to do to make sure that we are as clear and as clean as possible, we try to replicate what they did to see how they came up with the numbers. We weren't able to find those papers to replicate. Travis and Greg can give you more detail on this.
Yeah. Well, I'll just mention we attempted to, and even tried a couple different methodologies to say, well, maybe they tried this. Again, the way it would have been done would have been incorrect, but still to see if that was the case. We were unable to replicate it. All this should have been based on audited financial statements. So, I mean, and that's what we use, and those were out there in the public domain, obviously, and that's what they should have been using to do these calculations. But again, we just don't really know because we weren't able to find their work at all. We just got the numbers, and the numbers were pulled from the reports that were provided, but we were unable to recreate it. And we would assume that they would use the audited financial statements, but again, we just don't know.
And the reason for that question is we have, they're financially healthy. KSU's financially healthy. They're healthy. Then all of a sudden we have a cliff where there's a significant structural imbalance. 2020, I guess, in that range. Second question, and I'll refer you to page 18 on today's report presentation, where it shows the number of staff employed by KSU in business and financial operations. It was ranked fourth highest and was 125% of the group median. In other words, there were staff at KSU that theoretically were there to keep an eye on this stuff, kind of review financials, keep things in order. And you can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the way I'm portraying it. And then I refer back to the executive summary of the financial status. It says that KSU's internal audit function was non-existent for approximately 3 years due to a vacancy in the internal auditor position. So just as an outsider, I'm a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, but to me, if you're going into, if you're at a university with significant financial challenges, how can you leave that internal auditor function vacant for 3 years? That's kind of where, that's the question. How do we have, on one hand, 125% in that area, but there's no one in this position for 3 years? Has anyone looked at that yet?
Well, I'll let Greg go ahead.
Yeah, Greg probably could answer. I mean, it's a good question, and he may know some of the background there. Greg may, but yeah, I mean, there should have been someone there, at least one, if not more people. And actually, we're recommending that they outsource this function for a variety of reasons. But go ahead, Greg. You may have some history on this.
Actually, one of the challenges we have in a lot of this is we weren't there during this period. I mean, I was chief financial officer at KSU from 15 to 17. At that time, we had an internal auditor, and we had a pretty strong internal audit function at that point. And I think when President Thompson was there through the end of 17, that auditor was still in place. At some point in the following year, that auditor left, and I believe he's now back with the city of Louisville, where he was the internal auditor for the city before he came to KSU.
Was that 17? Is that
yeah,
17?
Sometime I don't know exactly when,
Sure.
but sometime President Thompson left it probably June of 17, and I believe sometime between June and maybe October, the internal auditor left. I don't know what efforts were in place to find one. I know that there was an RFP issued at one point for internal auditor. It was not completed. And then I believe in around January of 20, the current internal auditor was hired. And I think he would say he had challenges getting information from the accounting and finance offices at KSU. I think, Travis, you probably heard that from him, that they and that's part of the function is the internal auditor has to have access to everything. And in fact, I've worked with Mr. Harris over the past few months, and we've tried to set up where he can go in the accounting office anytime he wants, pull any record he wants, and be trained on where all the documents and files are, because in my opinion, the internal auditor has access to everything. And but I think that function's got to get back in place. It's more important now probably than it's ever been. I think part of the CPE recommendation is when you outsource that, as a number of universities have, you gain a broader set of skills than one person can have. So as you do your risk assessment for the institution from year to year, 1 year it may be an IT function that you want to look at, 1 year it may be a cash control function, maybe a revenue function, and when you outsource that, you can get experts in all those areas that can be assigned. So it is, we're actually in the process of developing an RFP for that.
Mr. Chair, you're talking about process, protocols, policies, and people, right? And everybody knows I was the interim president there in 2016 and 17. I could not imagine operating without an internal auditor. I would be afraid to, actually. But I think also we have to, we don't know who was included in that number of people in that shop. It could have been a variety of folks. Sure. We know that CFO had a lot of people answering to him. So they may not have been doing exactly the finances or the overseeing of finances, but your question is still a good question. You know, if you have that in place, that's the job. And it would be important, I think, to note that all of us who are in administration and higher ed, you know, I ask the questions. I may not know everything about it, but I'll try to ask the questions to make sure I can learn.
And for clarity, the purpose of that, I wasn't implicating that of the 125%, those weren't other people in you know, different parts of the university. My point was, like, that is one of the most important positions in the university, and that should have been filled. But I'll step aside for a moment. Representative Bojanowski. Thank you. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Dr. Thomas, Mr. Rush, President Stamps, Mr. Powell, y'all got a mess and a big challenge. And y'all been before us on several occasions, and I think y'all doing a spectacular job of trying to rectify the ship and get it floating once more. And I want to express my deep appreciation for your experience, your knowledge to go through and try to correct this situation. So kudos to that and being transparent, as you said, Dr. Thompson. I do appreciate that. I wanted to ask a question about the tactics and measurements that you are looking at. You list a couple of things in your presentation, and maybe this might be for Mr. Powell, in terms of quality assurance, quality control measures, and then making sure that this doesn't happen again. I know you're there in the past, and things are going pretty well. Although I looked at, just using a score, you mentioned that they use a score of 8.35, and the actual computation was 4.42. Still good, but it's still a disparity. I want to see what measurements, control mechanisms have y'all applied or discussed in order to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And once again, I think y'all are doing a good job in getting things moving, and I do appreciate that. But I just want to make sure that we get some comfort level and not go down this path again.
Well, a great question. By the way, those numbers there were not produced when I was there. That was in the management plan that started afterwards, and that was given to us retrospectively, number one. Number two, I think your question is really the $10 question, right? CPE, I tell people we have enough power to get us in trouble, and sometimes I probably use what I don't have. But, I mean, in this case, the governor gave us an executive order that allowed us to go in and deeply look inside. These folks, I can't say enough positive things about them. They just opened the books. But we also did what I call a third-party look. We pretended that we knew nothing about them and just looked at it from the standpoint and verifying, not that I don't trust Greg. He's been my left hand for a long time. But we wanted to make sure that it's true. So this is what we've done up to this point. Now, this executive order runs out, as you all know, after this year. But we're proposing, as our board was proposing, that we have an ongoing deep consideration of all those things in place. Now, that's not the only thing. We're not just looking at the finances. We want to make sure that the structures of the campus is one by which that they can thrive in a variety of ways, academic structures, student success structures, and so on. So as of now, we're acting as even though I have some control over KSU just virtually by being in my position. But we didn't have that. We didn't have those deep looks. We couldn't go in and open their records and go in deep and find out what's going on. Right now, we can. And so that's what we currently have in place. And Greg and Travis, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything different or Claire.
Greg, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you've already done to this point, and then we can talk about some future items too.
You know, this is one of the first questions that the board asked me when I got there is how do we make sure that we can have faith in the information we're given and to make sure this doesn't happen again. And a part of it is working with the board to make sure they understand the financial statements and understand what to look for in the financial statements. And we've talked about this a couple of times, that the way that the impact of the pension system is reflected in university financial statements can be misleading. I mean, it masks and hides what's actually going on. I mean, it's there for a reason, but it's important that you talk through that with the board, where they understand when we see that net asset or net reserve number, what makes that up. And that information wasn't provided to the board. One of the things we're working with the council on is what is a good set of solid reports that the board should see every meeting. And one of the things I did for Dr. Thompson when I worked at CPE is I attended all the university board meetings. So I did that for 2 years and attended all of them. So I got to see a good sample of how they presented financial information to their boards. And we're working with the council to develop that kind of package for KSU. To get back to, I think, Chairman West's point earlier, the internal audit function is critical. And one of the things we've put in place right now is everything I say to the board is verified right now by Ms. Krause, who's been wonderful, by the way, and incredibly helpful, has a wealth of knowledge, and has been essential, I think, in getting us to this point. But she verifies everything I say. And our internal auditor also verifies everything I say. And I think that's something our board will obviously have to decide, but I believe that's what they want, is that internal auditor works for them, does not work for the president, and doesn't work for me, doesn't work for anybody else in the university but the board. And if we have that in place where that external set of eyes that reports only to the board is reviewing that information every meeting, then I think we get to what your goal there is, that that the board has faith in what information they're provided, and CPE would as well, and we don't get in this situation again.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, if you don't mind. And that's good. And I think maybe through both chairs of the LRC is that, and I'm sure you'll probably update us on a periodic basis to make sure that we can see the measurements, see how you're going, because obviously we want to partner you, make sure you're successful. And I'm looking at this, I think it's a $27 million that y'all need. To me, it's like a working capital loan situation, and that's my business hat on. And I can see this could be really work because you're going through a good process and a good procedure in order to help justify going through that working capital concept. And like I said, we're going to do what we can to help you out and be successful, because y'all have got some good things in process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could give me a little leeway, I've got a little more than one question. Okay. President Thompson, President Stamps, Greg, Travis, I appreciate you all being here today. We've had numerous conversations. I want to start out with the broad concept of the role of CPE with all our post-secondary institutions, and then dig down into KSU. And you've kind of implied this in your previous statement, that the reason you all were able to do this is because of the executive order from the governor. You could dig into KSU. Some states, their post-secondary board has a governance model. Here in Kentucky, CPE is a consulting model. Could you elaborate a little bit on what role you have and what authority CPE has? And my background for that question is, how do we know there's not another one of our public universities or colleges that's having similar issues? And what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen in another place? Thank you.
At the risk of scaring any of my post-secondary presidents, there's a couple of points that you make that's true. We are a coordinating board. Now, we are what is called a super coordinating board because we do have some governance. I mean, we set tuition ceilings. We can review programs. We approve programs. We set the strategic agenda for the state. Not all coordinating boards do that. So we do have certain levels of, and a lot more. As a matter of fact, Travis said pages and pages and pages of it. What we don't have is the power to go in at will and deeply into the finances, as an example. I mean, we set the funding model, and we all actually approve it, but we use that. But we don't have that in place. Now, you ask me, once again, the $12 question in this case, how do we know? Well, we don't know unless we get a big indication, usually after something happens. But we can get this also with our private institutions in which I actually license. So when it comes down to finances, our hope is that we're transparent with our campuses and they're transparent with us. But when it comes to direct powers, and I'll let my attorney answer this fully here, Travis, but when it comes down to direct power, we don't have that kind of power to go in and deeply look into the internal workings in many cases or the internal operational, financial operational processes.
I'll just mention, obviously everything Dr. Thompson says 100% correct, but I'll tell you a couple things we were doing, and something that we're going to start doing is, number one, we were, as I think Greg mentioned, when he was at CP, he was attending all the board meetings, and particularly some of the financial committees as well. And so not just sort of seeing what was going on at the institutional level and keeping an eye on it from that perspective. And we hope to continue that. Obviously, we've been all spending a lot of any extra time that we've had on KSU right now, but we hope to start that back up again. And obviously, COVID made that a little easier because of the virtual nature of the board meetings. But we still want to get back on track and doing that. And the other thing that we are going to start doing, again, these are all based on audited financial statements, is doing the CFI score for other institutions as well. So we can calculate this. We've got a process by which we were already working on this anyway for both our private and our public institutions. And then this, when this KSU issue came about, we were ready to use it. And this was kind of our test case, but we'll be able to do that. And while, financial statements are a little backward looking, as I mentioned before, even when they are done timely, they will be able to notice trends over time, and we'll be able to see issues. And then at that point, we can raise issues with you or with the institution. While we may not have any direct power to go in, we can still put some things in place to help, that if there's any red flags to get raised, we can certainly follow up and ask questions about it.
And we do, by the way, just to let you know, we have exercised the power that we've had in the way that's been judicious and fair, and I think our campuses have bought into that. But bottom line, that's Representative Tipton, that's the powers we do have.
Follow up on that House Bill 303, the Management and Improvement Plan from a few years ago. I've got a copy of it at my office somewhere. Are your recommendations now similar to what was recommended in that plan? And is the fact that you have limited capability to follow up part of the reason why we didn't know what was going on, that maybe that plan was not being implemented?
The answer is kinda and yes. Kinda in that we're going in much deeper detail here. I mean, the last time Management Improvement Plan, it was a situation where you all just agreed not to cut KSU the dollars you were cutting the other institutions. It wasn't 27 million worth there. So what we're doing here is something much more detailed, much more in depth. Now, the way the Management Improvement Plan, and I was the guy that we set that up when I was at KSU, but we were setting it up with the full plan. We were going to be successful no matter what, and I think if you looked at the numbers, we were setting it up for that. So there may not have been a deep enough reason for us to look at it, but CPE was never in the mix on that. It was always you. It was always KSU and the legislature, and not CPE was actually out of the mix. We asked them to report it to us. This is where we used some powers we probably didn't fully have, but we asked, and they did. But in this case, we're asking that CPE be in the middle of this, and that will be the difference. Travis, were there some things you want to add?
Well, the other thing I'll mention too is, you sort of alluded to this, but in 2016, we had KSU still had significant cash reserves. So we were less focused on, we're focused on the financial health, and we looked at that financial index. Again, we were trying not to have KSU cut when other institutions were, but all these additional financial controls that we're talking about were not necessarily, we didn't know that wasn't an issue at that time, but now it is. And some of the other, items as well of different opportunities to look at, Dr. Thompson mentioned we're going to be going a little bit further. Some of that was in there, but obviously, 5 years later, we're in a different landscape. So there'll be some overlap, but it should be very different.
I want to dig into slide number 6 that graph, cash flow and working capital. As I'm looking at this, that change from 2018 to 2019 is so dramatic. That ought to be a red flag. Everybody ought to be throwing red flags on that. Was this information not available to the board or anybody to understand this? Or how was this? I guess my question is, how was this change in financial status? Why did it not present a red flag that we were made aware of at that time?
In my opinion, and if you go back and look at the net position and net reserves on the financial statements in 19 and 20, they don't show that dramatic decline. If you focus solely on net position, which is what a lot of folks will look at, and frankly, administrations will tell people look at the net position at the universities. In both 19 and 20, we had a very positive result from the pension system, in that the way the pension liability was reflected on financial statements for all the universities, frankly, the comprehensive universities that are in KERS and KTRS. But the positive impact at KSU, I don't have the numbers in front of me, was about $8 or $9 million in 19 and 20. There was also some capital assets, the end of the boiler plant project, the Atwood renovation, that also goes into net position, because when those assets are completed, they're booked as an asset, and assets minus liabilities is net position. The impact of those two things together, if you just looked at that bottom line, you didn't see this. Now, if you looked at cash, you saw it, because cash went from about 19 million, dropped to 14 million, dropped to 2, dropped to 3. And current liabilities increased dramatically, because at that point the administration had also opened a revenue anticipation note, which is essentially a line of credit. And so that was not, from what I have seen, the use of that note was not fully disclosed to the board during that period either. The board was aware the note had been created. They had to authorize it, but there wasn't a regular reporting of draws against that note. So I think if, a cursory examination of the financial statements, you don't see a lot of this in the bottom line. You don't see a going concern issue, because it's a state institution. They're still going by the time the audits are done. And so the auditors didn't take the position that you had that issue either. And also, as Mr. Powell mentioned earlier, the financial statements were coming out in 9 to 12 months after the end of the fiscal year. So at that point, and to some degree, people have moved on. They're looking at the current year. The information they were provided in budget to actuals and board meetings were that things were okay. And there was, I think, in the April or June board meeting of last year, they were asked specifically how they were, and they were told, I believe, that they were 70. I may get the number wrong, and so I won't say the number. They were told that they were in the black from a budget standpoint, and that's in the board minutes. So the information I think the board was getting, it was a combination of delayed, to some degree confusing, and I won't necessarily say that was intentional. Chairman West asked earlier about whether it was multiple sets of books or disorganization. From what I've seen, it was disorganization. And they talked about the accounting system at KSU. It's Banner, which, to be honest, works perfectly fine at a number of other universities. When it was implemented at KSU in 2011, there were a lot of problems with the implementation. They've never been corrected. When I was there before, we tried to correct them. We made some limited progress, but it's not where it should be. And we're actually taking a project to our board on December 2nd to begin the process of having the company that operates that system come in, do a thorough analysis of how we use it, how it's set up, and what we need to do to fix it. And part of that is in the whole process of making sure the board has the information that they need on an ongoing basis. They're not relying on one financial statement that may be coming in 9 to 12 months after the fact, and that we make sure that they have the tools they need to understand that financial statement when it's presented to them.
One last comment, Mr. Chair.
Can I jump in?
Go ahead. Go, please do.
I'll come right back to you. I'm asking this question because it seems to fit right here. I had it on my list. You mentioned the point about operating expenses, basically a loan against operating expenses. To me, I would consider that's a red flag in and of itself. When did that first occur?
March of 2019.
Okay, so that relatively
March,
recently.
April, May of 2019, I believe, was when they first began to draw from that revenue note or revenue anticipation.
And you mentioned it earlier, but just to be a little bit more specific, did anyone advise the board that, hey guys, this is serious. This is a red flag. We are now borrowing money against day-to-day operating expenses that we're going to receive, I'm assuming, from the state or tuition or whatever pot of money that is. Was anybody advised?
Not to my knowledge. And from the information that I saw, I wouldn't mind if Travis weighed in on that as well from their review and the interviews that they did. But it was my understanding and how that note was discussed is it was just a part of normal operations of the university. There was a reference to cash flow issues.
Right.
And I think the board was made aware of cash flow issues.
Okay.
Yeah, Claire, you were there though, right?
No, I don't think that the board was made aware of that at all. They were informed when they approved the note, but it was in reference to some potential construction projects that were coming up. But they were not informed that there was a draw on the note.
Thank you. Representative, back to you.
Yeah. And just, I want to direct a comment, talk a little bit about the presidential search process. And I'm grateful to see that there is a broad section of people from the community who are invested stakeholders. I think that's very important. And really, I've got a comment toward those people. You've accepted a tremendous responsibility. And I think through this whole process, we've been reminded of one thing. Any entity, any organization, leadership is essential. Leadership at the top. So to those members on the committee, you have a tremendous responsibility. I encourage you to be diligent and prudent in your search, and I want to wish you the best and pray that you all can come up. You all know 100% who you want as the next president. So appreciate your willingness to serve in that role. Thank you.
Representative McCool.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Certainly, I know this has to be a difficult time, and I am grateful that you all are looking into that. So I've got some comments that I know you know well, and when dealing with SACs, but I will say that Kentucky State University is absolutely vital to the state and to our students. So we have, in Kentucky, we have accreditation in this SACs. We have boards that are kind of overseers or watchdogs of what's going on. But somehow that has broken down. So I'm gonna read what you know well from section 13 of SACs, and you know it about every word of it. But I'm just gonna read this, and just so everybody else understands. From SACs, it says that the institution shall have financial and physical resources. The institution has sound financial resources and demonstrated stable financial basis to support the mission of the institution and the scope of its programs and services. That's a core requirement. If you fail to do that, not you, but if any institution fails to do that, they're in jeopardy of losing their accreditation. What does that mean? That means that's going to hurt the current students, the past students, and the future students. And the institution and the state. So how that slipped through, right now where we're at, I don't see that we're very stable at this point. Now we'll get there, and I think it's a good thing that you're looking at it. In addition to that, the institution audits must have the most recent, and it was noted in the comments that hadn't been done in 3 years. Must be approved by the board. Where was the board? I'm not faulting the board. Maybe they did not know this. But it's critical as my colleagues have said, that leadership be responsible and accountable for these types of things. And the institution exercises appropriate control of all financial resources. That's what it says. And you know that. And I know you know that. So I guess is Kentucky State University, as its financial shortfalls, are you taking the hard reviews on making sure that you're focusing on your mission? What I see sometimes is institutions want to do all things for everybody. Let's get back to basics. Get back to what you do and do it well. Transparency. This is, although it's a difficult time, but it's also an opportunity to bring out transparency and show we're all in this together, and we can get through this together, but at the same time it's critical. And so I don't really have a question. I just wanted to bring that point out and say thank you for what you're doing. I'm very concerned. I'll be watching. I will be watching. And thank you for today.
Representative McCool, I did want to comment on that. I've been in close contact with Bill Whelan. We talked this weekend about KSU in great detail. Yes, if we don't get $23 million, we're probably in serious trouble, right? In more ways than one. That's number one. Number two, SACS just reaffirmed in what year?
19.
In 19. So they reaffirmed with the knowledge that they had then. You see the numbers where it's at now, right, and what happened. And I think that's an important piece to understand. But the last piece you made, I think, is the more crucial piece of this conversation. KSU, once again, you heard me say the need for it to remain an HBCU, but there's some other things that we can do. I mean, we can build a top-notch educational program there that really feeds the needs of the state in more ways than one. Number two, we can really reformulate our public administration to serve Frankfurt and state government. There's a whole lot of things that fall in that mission. Great liberal arts STEM. Some of the areas you've seen earlier that we were number one in public services on are land grant. You have to remember we have the best aquaculture program in the world, one of two. And surely, and so our land grants. So there, I don't want us to have all these conversations, for me not to mention the strengths of the mission, right? And for us not to refocus what we're doing on that. I know we're talking about money a lot, but we have to, as much as anything else from CPE now I'll talk, we have to make sure that they also put in place strong processes, build possibly a new culture around this whole idea about what it means to be mission-related, mission-focused, but also focusing on the needs of Kentucky in more ways than one. And there is a reason why KSU exists and still a reason why it should. So I really appreciated that last statement.
And if I may, Representative McCool and Representative Fleming, I just want to say in our first meeting on day one, after all of this broke out and CFO Rush was not officially employed by KSU at the time, but was allowed to come over, and he was in the room. And one of the first conversations we had dealt with our responsibility to our students. And so, Representative McCool, when you mentioned that, I really appreciate that, because that's why Kentucky State University exists. And I want to just share with you all, Representative Fleming, you asked what did we do to ensure that this will not happen again. And one of our first conversations centered around we must act. As leaders of the institution, we must be held accountable for our actions. For our non-actions, our inactions, we don't make excuses. We will get back to the basics. And one of the things we talked about in acting is accountability, communication. We talked about compliance. We talked about institutional policies and our procedures and what we will follow. We talked about the importance of our promise, and that promise was to our students. And the way we uphold that promise to them is to ensure that as an institution, we act responsibly and that we do what we know is right on behalf of Kentucky State University. And as institutional leaders, if you want to remain here at Kentucky State University, then you will follow institutional policies, processes, and procedures. And CFO Rush will tell you, because I've sent several things back to his office, if it does not align with policy, it will not happen at Kentucky State University. We will ensure that we can protect this institution for years to come. And I just wanted to say I appreciate your comments because our students have been alarmed and very concerned. And I think oftentimes we forget why we exist. And our mission is important to what we do every day.
Senator West, this is Senator Thomas. I realize I'm not a member of the committee, but if you could indulge me, I would like to ask a question or two to Dr. Thompson.
Senator Thomas, I'll put you on the list. We've got two ahead of you, and hopefully they can be brief. Representative Graham.
Mr. Chairman, you and both chairmen have asked the questions that I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to say this as a graduate of this university, of which I love. We've got to get this right.
Absolutely.
There's no time. It's a bad time, but it's also a good time, because what we're seeing from the General Assembly standpoint is that over the past, we have not done what we should have done. But now we have to correct those things that were not done in the past, but we got to move on. But we also got to bring a system in place where we are held accountable for our actions, and that starts with the Board of Regents, that starts with the General Assembly, that starts with the administration, that starts with the governor's office in terms of making sure that all of our institutions are doing what's right. I sponsored legislation years ago that would give more responsibility to CPE when your predecessor was here. And what we came out with was a program in which we did orientation for new members who were coming on Board of Regents. And many times, many of those people who want to be on Board of Regents, they want to be on the big institutions, such as UK and U of L. And we've got to find people who are going to be engaged all the time, 24/7, on the Board of Regents, just as they would be if they were on the UK or U of L boards. So we've got to get this right. And we've got to make sure that if we are able to talk to those people who were at the institution at the time all of this took place, between 15 and now, if we can talk with them, although many of them will probably not want to talk. But we need to find out what happened, why it happened, and what we can do to improve the methods by which these reportings should be made on time, just as I'm thinking that the other institutions are having to do the same thing as Kentucky State University, but we got to get it right. And now is the time to address all those things from the past, but not to really address them, but to focus on the future of the university. But not only that, on how much of an impact it has on this community, my community, a community that I was born, raised, reared, and educated in, as well as the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Because that university, my university, Kentucky State University, has been an integral part of this Commonwealth and its growth. And as I said in a previous meeting, it has also been a major factor in creating a middle class of people of color, of people who come from a poor or poverty background, and for people who are first-time graduates for their families. So that's the focus that we should have on dealing with kids who have the opportunity to improve their lives. Because every parent, all of us who are parents in this room, what we want is for our children to do better than what we did, just as our parents did. And that should be the focus of the university, and that should be the focus of this Commonwealth. And that's what I know in this community we want to do, and to work with the university in a way in which we're hand in hand, and we're benefiting from those graduates, and from those graduates bringing in economic development, and all those things are important to a community. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, both of you and all of you who are on this this committee, and I thank you all for bringing this presentation to us.
Thank you, Representative Graham. We've got two more. Just if you could hold it to 1 minute, we're already over time. Representative Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Thompson, each one of you on the board. This question is not directed at you. Please understand that. But we have to ask the hard questions, and you talk about transparency. We've heard what I've heard is, there's been some documents not found. There's been some missing links that you can't come up with. Two questions. One, has all the funds been accounted for? Or are you sure all the funds have been accounted for? And the reason I say this, we say it's misleading information. We say it's missing information. And when you get right down to it, is it neglect or is it intent? And could there be some criminal activities that need to be looked into? And the last thing I want to do is bring a harsh note against the university because, as you said, President, the students are the purpose. And I appreciate my fellow Representative Graham. That's his university, and he's proud of it, and we are proud of it. And we're thankful to have him here because of that university. But at the end of the day, we've got to look at the brass tacks. And can you assure us that the funds are accounted for? And if you don't, I know you've got so much information, it's hard to tell. But could this go from negligence to intent, which could be some, and we talk about accountability. I know the group here before us is highly accountable, and your intentions are to not let it happen again. But let's look at this window, these 2 or 3 years. If there's people in there that were in there for the wrong reasons or whatever, then, just I hate to put you on the spot, but just that's looming in the silence. And I tend to speak where most are silent. So,
well, we're happy to answer your question. I'll let Greg start since he and Travis looked at the numbers.
We, at this point, have not seen any evidence that there's anything missing. I'll just put it that way. When you look at the financial statements and you look at the expenditures over the past 3-4 years, what you see is a lot of spending in a lot of areas. Staffing, salaries, contracts, just a broad range of it. And to be fair, some of that spending led to results. University has the highest retention rate it's had, maybe even its history. I'm not absolutely sure. Graduation rate has moved from in the 20s to, I think, this year's 37%. Not trying to say that as an excuse, but some of the things that were done to improve student success. The problem is they were done without an eye on the budget, without an eye on the resources available. And it just led to just a lot of stuff and doing a lot of things over the past 3 or 4 years. We worked with the state auditor's office. We continue to provide them information, anything they request. We've talked a bit about the audits being late, and part of that is a result of several years of accounting entries that are hard to follow. And again, I think it's probably disorganization from what I see. But we will continue that review, and we continue to look through the past 3 or 4 years of expenses, and we'll continue to do that. So I can't definitively tell you right now that there's nothing there, but I have not seen anything to this point. There's been things in the press about credit card expenditures and those kind of things, and those are serious issues we need to look at. But at this point, I've not seen anything that can't be explained through just mismanagement and overspending.
And let me be clear, that's what we've seen. So we have a few things we're still looking in detail on, to be honest with you, and we may find something there. But if I thought there was something there, I would call for a forensic audit in a heartbeat. For a lot of reasons. Let me just say that. The second point, I know we're out of time almost, but the second point I think is very fair to say, intent goes a long way. Spending when you know you don't have the money to spend is intent. Getting to a point of where the numbers are wrong and you tell me something different, that's intent. So although no criminal activity, I don't want to sit here and sugarcoat that there are things that I forgot who said it, Representative Tipton, I think, the idea that leadership matters here. But we've so far have seen no criminal activity.
Well, again, I just want to reiterate how much I appreciate you and what you're doing, and not in any way question, your intentions or anything. But we do have to look at the hard part of it also. So, Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
We're already over time. Senator Thomas, if you want to chime in with a question, if you could keep it tight, we'd appreciate it.
I will certainly do my very best. First of all, let me say I appreciated Representative Graham's comments. Like him, I have a rich family legacy there. Both of my parents are graduates of Kentucky State University. In fact, they were there at Kentucky State at the same time Representative Graham's parents were at Kentucky State. And my grandparents also graduates of Kentucky State. So Kentucky State is very rich and deep in my bloodline. Couple of questions, Dr. Thompson, and I appreciate your comments about the strength of Kentucky State, so I don't want to let that go unacknowledged. One, does Kentucky State University do an independent audit every year? I know years ago when President Burst was president, we had an independent audit done every year by an outside accounting firm. Is that still done? That's my first question to you.
Yes, we're late on this last one, but yes, it is done every year.
Okay, and my second question, because like Senator West, Representative Tipton, my question is, I don't want to see this repeated again. Would you recommend that every year, for at least for the next 2 years anyway, that Kentucky State University come before A&R or this subcommittee and present that independent audit and give the legislature a chance to ask questions regarding what that audit says regarding expenditures and revenues at Kentucky State University?
Not only would I recommend that, I recommend more than the next 2 years. And I also would recommend that there would be some other things we bring to you from KSU, and that not just as a way of looking at the audit, but I think I would like for this legislature to hear also about those things that Representative McCool was talking about, the progression toward a thriving school that Representative Graham has called us to task on here. The idea that it's okay to look at the numbers, and I think that's good, but look at also the process that create and the procedures that creates those financial numbers. So I would argue that would be a minimum of what I would ask for.
That exhausts my question, Senator West.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. That concludes our meeting for today. I just want to make a parting comment. I would advise each committee member to read this financial status report from CPE. It's a good work product. We'll answer a lot of questions that have been brought up today. This is clearly, thanks to all the presenters on this topic, this is clearly one of the most important issues we will attempt to address this upcoming session for sure. We, as with many committees today, we just scratched the surface of what's there and what needs to be addressed. I would like to thank personally President Stamps for your role in this. I forget which founding father. Well, maybe it was George Washington talked about summer soldier. You're a winter soldier. It's not always good to come in at a bad time when things are the bleakest. But I appreciate your work. And these ultimately, these students at K-State deserve excellence. And that should be our ultimate goal. In here we talk about comparing to peer groups, other HBCUs, but ultimately we need to compare to other universities, regionals and our research universities. Are these kids getting the highest possible level of education? And that should be our ultimate goal. So